So today we are going to discuss the non-resident landlord scheme in the UK for people who own homes in UK and they're renting it out, but they're moved abroad. And what is the impact from an HMRC perspective? I'm joined by Laura Sant of LSR Partners to discuss more on this. Laura, thank you for joining us today.
Thanks for having me as always, Shiraz.
So, Laura, can you start with briefly defining what is this non-resident landlord scheme and what is the objective of this within the UK tax system?
So, non-resident landlord scheme basically means that you would register with HMRC as a non-resident landlord. Now, you're supposed to do this if you are living outside of the UK for more than 6 months of a particular tax year. That would kind of define you as a non-resident landlord. The reason that HMRC want you to register on the scheme is because it's still quite tricky for them to keep a monitor in terms of landlords who live outside of the UK. And there's a risk if you're not registered on the scheme of non-compliance. So yeah.
Thank you, Laura. And what would be the effects of landlords who moved out and who have to register under this scheme? And what sort of effects should they expect?
So if you are a non-resident landlord and are not registered on the scheme, then the starting point should be that either your letting agent, if you have a letting agent, or your tenant, if you don't have it, if you kind of let directly to your tenant, should be withholding 20% of tax from the kind of the rental income or the rental profits, and paying that over to HMRC on your behalf. The idea is that if they're doing that and you're not registered on the scheme, then the starting point is HMRC are at least recouping the tax that they feel they should be taking from any non-resident landlord. However, in a large number of instances, for example, if you leave the UK but you're a British national, you are eligible for a personal allowance. If you're an EA national as well, you're eligible for a personal allowance as a non-resident. So you may find that if you just kind of have them withholding this 20% tax at source, then actually they would be withholding too much tax. By registering on the scheme, what you're doing is you're telling HMRC, look, I'm aware I'm a non-resident landlord. I'm aware that I need to file a tax return with you on an annual basis. And I'm aware that I'm going to need to pay some tax if applicable. But it provides a cash flow advantage because by registering on the scheme, there is no longer the obligation to withhold the 20% tax at source, which means that you're receiving the rental income gross.
Okay, that makes sense because otherwise you would have 20% always locked within the withholding tax that would be calculated the year and that becomes a good source of cash flow for the landlord, right? Um,
Yeah. Yes.
because let's say someone has moved abroad, he might be considered as a non-resident landlord, but he did not register for the scheme. He did not tell the HMRC, and business as usual. Um, there's no one holding that withholding tax. So how do someone make sure that they are in the right scheme? They don't tell the HMRC. No one knows. No one is withholding tax. So what happens?
So if you don't register on the scheme, there is potential that HMRC might well be chasing you for further money. So if you owe them some taxes because the letting agent or the tenant hasn't been withholding money and paying that over to them, then they are likely to apply penalties. They're likely to ask you to file tax returns. It's going to take a lot of admin to get you up to date and get it kind of sorted on a real-time basis. There is a possibility that the letting agent or the tenant might well get into trouble from HMRC's perspective. However, I'm yet to see an instance where a tenant's gotten into trouble from HMRC's perspective because it's a little known rule. In terms of tenants, I would say.
Sure. What are the criteria that can determine if someone has become a non-resident landlord?
So as I say, you would kind of be considered a non-resident landlord if you are renting out property and if you're spending at least 6 months out of the UK, kind of at any point in the tax year. You are supposed to alert your, assuming it's a letting agent or even if it's let out directly to a tenant, you are supposed to let them know that you're leaving the UK at the point when you're leaving them. In the majority of instances, if it's a letting agent and you tell them that you will be becoming a non-resident landlord, they will start to withhold that 20% of tax at source. And then you would need to submit something called an NRL1 form to HMRC to let them know that you're a non-resident landlord and to register on the scheme in order to allow your letting agent to to effectively pay you without deducting tax at source. In terms of the logistics of how that works, my understanding is letting agents will withhold tax every month or whenever they're kind of paying you, and they will pay it over to HMRC once a quarter. So if your registration is processed after that tax has been paid over to HMRC, you would then need to file a return at the end of the tax year in order to claim any refund of overpaid taxes. And I mean, even if you didn't have any overpaid taxes, once you're registered on that non-resident landlord scheme, you still need to make sure you're filing a tax return on an annual basis.
Sure. So on that note, like, can you, like, what are the tax obligations and what are the annual or quarterly reporting requirements? Mm,
As I say, with your letting agent, the reporting to HMRC is the obligation of the letting agent or the tenant. And as I say, that should be reported quarterly to HMRC and paid over quarterly to HMRC by the letting agent or the tenant. There should then be a kind of tax certificate issued to the non-resident landlord if taxes have been withheld, and that can then be input into your tax return. So there is a little section within the tax return that says kind of taxes deducted at source. And so when you would complete your tax return, you would include that, which would, as I say, assuming that either if you're not eligible for a personal allowance, because not everybody is eligible for a personal allowance as a UK tax non-resident, but if you were eligible for a personal allowance and your rental profits sat within your personal allowance, you should in principle be due a full refund. If you're not eligible for a full personal allowance, however, you have additional costs associated with running the property, for example, if there's kind of tax credits available for mortgage interest, or if you have insurance costs, things that might not have gone through your letting agent, then you will generally find that you'll be in a tax refund position as well, even if you've had taxes withheld.
sure. My last question would be on the idea of how does this scheme interact with other non-resident schemes? So, for example, someone who owns a property and moved abroad and they also want to declare themselves as UK non-tax resident, does they have to then automatically declare to registered in the NLR scheme? Or then if someone is declaring to be registered in the non-resident landlord scheme, they automatically have to be declared themselves as a UK non-tax resident? Or how does that interaction work? So which comes first?
So in principle, you can be considered a non-resident landlord whilst also remaining a UK tax resident, because of the way that the non-resident landlord scheme works. If you are considered non-resident, I would say you would be pretty much automatically considered a non-resident landlord by means of the fact that you have to be outside of the UK for a complete tax year to break residence. It's almost I say chicken and egg situation in terms of what would come first, in terms of registering as a non-resident landlord, or registering for self-assessment. And sometimes it depends what your situation is. So you may find that you have somebody who is already in UK self-assessment, and would continue filing tax returns anyway whilst they are a UK tax non-resident. Now, for them, the purpose of registering on the non-resident landlord scheme is probably primarily to give them a cash flow advantage so that they are receiving their rental profits gross rather than having tax deducted at source. And then they're simply just going through the process of filing their tax return year on year. We do sometimes get people who are not resident in the UK and are purely looking at investing in UK properties. For those, sometimes we have issues registering them on the non-resident landlord scheme initially until they have some sort of setup within HMRC system. And the main reason for that is because they don't have, if they've never been in the UK, they don't have a national insurance number. They don't have a UTR number. They have no kind of record with HMRC. So in some instances, registering them for their UTR first and then going down the process of registering on the non-resident landlord scheme second works slightly better.
That makes sense. Thank you. Thank you for clarifying that. Thank you, Laura, for joining us today as well.
No worries. Thanks for having me.
For today. And then, if any of the viewers who are planning on moving out of the UK, moving to Dubai, then they can get in touch with me. And if they need any tax help, they can get in touch with Laura. Both of the links will be in the description below where you can get in touch with us. Then that's it for today. And then we will see you in the next video.